At 4:06 in the morning, while you sleep in the dark, a single peptide molecule slips out of a neuron buried deep in your hypothalamus. It enters a private network of blood vessels no longer than a finger, vessels that exist for one purpose: to carry messages between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The molecule arrives in less than half a second. The pituitary fires back. Your adrenal glands, perched on top of your kidneys, begin to manufacture cortisol. You will not wake for another 2 hours. But the schedule has already begun. I want you to sit with that. A chemical conversation between 3 of your organs while you slept, and not one of them asked your permission. They were following a schedule you did not write, a schedule that has been running since you were a fetus, and that will continue running every day of your life, whether you pay attention to it or not. I want to show you that schedule. I want to walk you through it, hour by hour, molecule by molecule. By the time we are done, you will understand why you wake when you wake, why you get hungry when you get hungry, why you get drowsy at the same time every night, and why ignoring this schedule is one of the most quietly expensive things a human being can do to their own body. Before we talk about the schedule, I want to introduce you to the machinery. The body has roughly 50 different hormones. Most of them you have never heard of. They are not running their own independent clocks. They are not making their own decisions about when to fire. They are being told what to do, minute by minute, by a small set of structures buried inside your head and your trunk. I am going to give you the tour. The first structure sits above the place where your 2 optic nerves cross. If you point one finger between your eyebrows and another finger at the back of your skull, and you draw an imaginary line between them, the structure I am describing sits at the lower middle of that line. It is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The name simply means the nucleus above the optic chiasm. There are 2 of them, one on each side, and together they are about the size of a grain of rice, maybe 20,000 neurons total. That is your master clock. Every hormone schedule I am about to describe is taking its orders from those 20,000 neurons. Just above the master clock, a region about 4 cubic centimeters in size, the hypothalamus, controls the chemical output. The hypothalamus makes the releasing hormones, short peptide chains that act like memos. Each memo travels a very short distance to the pituitary gland, which hangs below the hypothalamus on a thin stalk, about the size of a pea. The pituitary reads the memo and dispatches its own hormones into your bloodstream. Those hormones travel everywhere. But the only cells that pay attention are the cells with the matching receptors: adrenal cortex, thyroid, ovaries or testes, liver, bone. Each one has been told at the cellular level, wait for this specific signal. Behind the hypothalamus, deep in the middle of your brain, sits another small structure called the pineal gland. The pineal is about the size of a grain of rice as well. Once a French philosopher named Descartes thought it was the seat of the soul. He was wrong about the soul. He was not entirely wrong about the importance. The pineal makes melatonin, only at night, and only when the master clock tells it to. On top of each of your kidneys sits a small triangular cap called an adrenal gland. The outer layer of that cap makes cortisol. The inner core makes adrenaline. They are not the same thing, and they are not on the same schedule. In your testes, if you are a man, or in your ovaries, if you are a woman, there are cells that manufacture testosterone or estrogen on receiving a different memo from the pituitary. Inside your pancreas, scattered through the tissue, are tiny clusters of cells called islets. They release insulin in response to glucose, but only in patterns that vary by time of day. Your stomach lining makes ghrelin. Your fat cells make leptin. That is the machinery. A master clock the size of a grain of rice. A hypothalamus the size of an almond. A pineal the size of a pea. 2 adrenal caps. A pair of gonads. A pancreas full of islets. A stomach and a fat layer that talk back. All of it networked. All of it on a single schedule. Now let me show you that schedule. I will start with cortisol, because cortisol is what woke you up. Or rather, cortisol is what is finishing the job of waking you up right now. Around 3 in the morning, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, that grain of rice clock, begins to signal a part of the hypothalamus called the paraventricular nucleus. The hypothalamus secretes corticotropin-releasing hormone. The pituitary releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. A longer-chain peptide we will simply call ACTH. ACTH travels to the adrenal cortex and instructs it to convert cholesterol into cortisol. The whole cascade is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis for short. By the time you open your eyes, cortisol has been rising for hours. It will peak somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes after waking. This peak is called the cortisol awakening response. Roger Guillemin and Andrew Schally, working independently in the 1960s and 70s, mapped out the hypothalamic releasing hormones that drive this cascade. They shared the Nobel Prize in 1977 for that work. The corticotropin-releasing hormone molecule itself was finally isolated and characterized in 1981 by Wiley Vale at the Salk Institute. 41 amino acids long, a short peptide chain that gives orders to your entire stress system. Cortisol does several things at the same time. It raises your blood sugar by telling the liver to break down glycogen. It mobilizes amino acids from muscle. It increases the sensitivity of your blood vessels to adrenaline. It dampens your immune system slightly. It primes your attention. All of this happens before you put your feet on the floor. Now here is the number that should interest you. Elliot Weitzman and his colleagues at Montefiore Hospital in the 1970s measured cortisol every 20 minutes for 24 hours in healthy adults. They found that the peak morning level is somewhere between 2 and 4 times higher than the lowest level, which occurs around midnight. The cortisol rhythm is not subtle. It is a 4-fold daily swing, and it is highly reproducible. You can take a person, lock them in a dark room with no clocks for 2 weeks, and the rhythm continues. Jürgen Aschoff and Rutger Wever did exactly this in the 1960s at the Max Planck Institute in a converted bunker in Germany. The cortisol rhythm did not flatten. It free ran, drifting by about 12 to 20 minutes each day. Your body, given no external cues at all, keeps producing the schedule. Why does the body do this? Cortisol at sunrise prepares you to confront a day. Glucose into the blood. Vessels primed. Inflammation suppressed. Attention sharpened. It is a chemical alarm clock written in proteins. And it has been doing this in human beings for as long as human beings have existed. Now here is what I want you to notice. The peak is in the morning. The trough is at midnight. If you flip that schedule, if you stay up working under bright light and try to sleep when the sun is rising, your cortisol does not flip easily. It takes days, sometimes weeks. The grain of rice clock at the base of your brain is conservative. It does not believe you when you tell it that midnight should now be noon. It waits for the light. It waits for the temperature. It waits for the meals. And while it is waiting, your cortisol rhythm and your behavior are out of phase. Eve Van Cotter at the University of Chicago measured this in shift workers across the 1980s. The cortisol rhythm and the sleep-wake cycle in chronic night shift workers were not aligned, even after years on the schedule. The body was still running on solar time, and the same signal from your master clock that ramped up cortisol overnight was also, at exactly the same moments, telling another small gland to stop manufacturing something else. That other gland is the pineal. The molecule it stops making in the morning is melatonin. Melatonin was discovered in 1958 by Aaron Lerner at Yale. He had been working on the question of why frog skin turns light or dark, and he found a substance in the pineal gland of cows that made amphibian skin pale. He named it melatonin, from melas, the Greek word for dark. It would take another 20 years to work out that in humans the same molecule controls the schedule of sleep. Here is how it works. The grain of rice clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, sends a signal down through the spinal cord and back up through a small chain of nerves called the cervical sympathetic chain. The signal arrives at the pineal gland. During the day, the signal says, "Do not make melatonin." At night, the signal is removed and the pineal begins to synthesize melatonin from the amino acid tryptophan. By about 9 in the evening, melatonin starts to rise in your bloodstream. By 2 or 3 in the morning, it has reached its peak, somewhere between 60 and 120 picograms per milliliter, depending on age and individual variation. By 6 in the morning, with the rise in cortisol and the arrival of light at the retina, the pineal output collapses. Daytime melatonin levels are essentially zero. The pineal is one of the only glands in the body whose output is suppressed by light. And not just any light. Blue light, specifically. Wavelengths around 480 nanometers have the strongest suppressive effect. Charles Czeisler at Harvard demonstrated through the 1980s that exposure to bright light at night can shift the melatonin rhythm by hours within a single session. A few thousand lux at the right time of evening can delay your melatonin onset by 2 hours. Your body now thinks it is 2 hours earlier than it is. Your sleep gets delayed accordingly. Your cortisol rhythm shifts. The whole schedule moves. I want you to think about what that means. A grain of rice clock in your head, a pea-sized gland in your skull, a network of nerves and blood vessels, and the entire schedule is being adjusted every day by photons hitting the back of your retina. The retina is wired not only to your visual cortex for seeing, but also to your suprachiasmatic nucleus through a separate pathway for timing. There are cells in the retina whose only job is to tell the clock what time of day it is. They do not contribute to vision. They tell time. Now consider the person reading at 3 in the morning with a tablet bright with blue light. The person watching television in bed at midnight. The person who shines a flashlight at the ceiling at 4 to read the alarm. Each of those photons is hitting the back of the retina and slowing or stopping melatonin production. The pineal does not know that the person is just checking the time. It receives the signal and complies. While the pineal is finishing its night's work, a second chemical pulse, completely separate from melatonin, but only released when you are deeply asleep, has been firing into your bloodstream in waves. That second pulse is growth hormone. Despite its name, growth hormone is not only for growing children. Adults make it too. Adults need it. And the timing of its release is dictated by sleep, not by light directly. Growth hormone comes from the anterior pituitary. It is released in pulses, short bursts every 2 to 3 hours throughout the day. But the largest burst, by far, occurs during the first deep sleep cycle of the night. Jerome Sasson, Elliot Weitzman, and colleagues at Montefiore Hospital published in 1969 the first careful study showing that growth hormone secretion in adults is tightly linked to slow-wave sleep, the deepest stages of non-rapid eye movement sleep, which dominate the first half of the night. They sampled blood every 20 minutes overnight in healthy young men. The growth hormone peak almost always coincided with the first slow-wave sleep episode. Wake the person up before that episode. The peak does not happen. Delay sleep by 3 hours. The peak shifts by 3 hours and also shrinks. Growth hormone instructs the liver to release insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1, into the blood. IGF-1 then circulates and tells tissues to repair, to grow, to lay down protein, to mobilize fat for fuel. In an adult, the function is no longer to grow taller. It is to repair what was damaged during the day. Microtears in muscle from movement, damaged proteins from oxidation, slow turnover in skin and bone. Most of that repair happens at night. Most of it depends on slow-wave sleep. Most of that slow-wave sleep is in the first 3 or 4 hours after you fall asleep. The number to hold in your mind is this. In a healthy adult, somewhere between 60 and 75% of the day's total growth hormone is released during nighttime sleep, almost all of it in the first half. Shorten that first half by staying up late, by drinking alcohol that suppresses slow-wave sleep, by interrupting it with anxiety, and you lose that nightly repair pulse. You cannot fully make it up the next day. Yves van Cotter, the same researcher I mentioned earlier, measured this carefully in middle-aged men through the 1980s. Slow-wave sleep declines steadily with age. Growth hormone secretion declines in lockstep. By the time a person reaches 60, the nightly growth hormone pulse can be 1/4 of what it was at 20. Some of this is normal aging, some of it is sleep architecture changing. The relationship is direct. Less deep sleep means less growth hormone. Less growth hormone means less nightly repair. And while the pituitary was firing growth hormone into the blood at midnight, another axis, running in parallel, on its own schedule, was preparing for its peak just a few hours later. I am going to talk about testosterone now, because the testosterone schedule is the cleanest example. But estrogen and progesterone also follow daily rhythms, with the monthly cycle layered on top. Testosterone in adult men peaks in the early morning. 6 to 8 o'clock is the highest concentration. It drops by 25 to 35% by the late afternoon. Then it climbs again overnight to the next morning's peak. The pattern is not subtle. It has been measured in thousands of men, in dozens of studies, since the 1960s. Why so high in the morning? Probably because the same HPA axis that drives cortisol is also priming the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis to release luteinizing hormone, which tells the Leydig cells in the testes to make testosterone. The two systems are not unrelated. They share the same upstream timing signal from the clock. In women, estrogen and progesterone follow a monthly schedule that I will not pretend to summarize here. Within that monthly cycle there are also daily rhythms. Cortisol is higher in the morning. Luteinizing hormone pulses are stronger overnight in certain phases of the cycle. Body temperature rises after ovulation. The body is doing layered timing, daily over monthly over yearly. The grain of rice clock keeps time on the daily layer. The other timekeepers operate above it and below it. The implication for a man, especially a man over 40, is this. If you measure testosterone in the afternoon, you are measuring at the trough. If you measure it at sunrise, you are measuring at the peak. The same person, the same gland, two different numbers. The difference is the schedule. Now I want to bring this back to something you do not associate with hormones, but should. The timing of when you eat. Your pancreas secretes insulin in response to glucose. Everyone learns this in school. What is not always taught is that insulin sensitivity changes across the day. Your cells respond more strongly to insulin in the morning than in the evening. The same glucose load given at 8 in the morning and at 8 in the evening produces a higher blood sugar in the evening, by 25 to 40% in healthy adults. Yves van Cotter and others at the University of Chicago showed this through the 1980s using carefully controlled glucose tolerance tests. The body is more efficient at handling food in the morning, less efficient at handling it at night. Leptin is the satiety hormone. It is secreted by fat cells and signals to the brain that you have enough stored energy. Leptin levels rise overnight, peaking around 1 in the morning. They are at their lowest in the middle of the day. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It is secreted mostly by the stomach lining. Ghrelin rises before meals, before, not during, and falls after eating. The pattern of ghrelin spikes in someone on a regular eating schedule mirrors that schedule exactly. The body learns when meals come. It releases the hunger hormone in anticipation. The implication is what you have probably already noticed in yourself. If you eat dinner at 6 every night for 2 weeks, you will be hungry at 6 on the 15th night, even if you have skipped lunch. The schedule has been learned. The hormones have been trained. Disrupt the schedule, eat late, skip breakfast, eat through the middle of the night, and the rhythms desynchronize from the master clock. Your cortisol is high in the morning, but your insulin sensitivity is now flatter. Your leptin peak is blunted. Your ghrelin spikes at irregular times. The schedule is still there. The hormones are still running, but the timing is no longer coordinated, and the body pays a price. I want to pause here and be honest about the evidence. I have made a series of claims about timing. Some are bedrock. Some are well established with disagreement at the edges. Some are reasonable inference. Let me sort them for you. The bedrock, what I would call settled science as of when I am speaking, includes the existence of the suprachiasmatic nucleus as the master clock, the cortisol morning peak and the fourfold daily swing, the melatonin rhythm and its suppression by light, the link between slow-wave sleep and growth hormone, and the daily testosterone rhythm in men. These have been measured by multiple independent groups in multiple countries over decades. The evidence is firm. The well-established but still being refined, what I would call strong but evolving, includes the daily rhythm of insulin sensitivity, the leptin and ghrelin patterns, and the consequences of light exposure timing on the entire schedule. The findings here are consistent across studies, but the magnitude varies. Individual differences matter. A small fraction of the population is naturally shifted earlier or later than average, what some researchers are calling chronotype, and that variation accounts for some of the differences between studies. Tilro Enneberg in Munich has been mapping this variation through the 1980s, and the basic finding that humans come in early rising and late rising varieties along a continuous distribution is solid. The mechanisms behind chronotype differences are still being worked out. The reasonable inference, what I would call physiologically consistent but not yet proven in the relevant outcome, is the connection between chronic disruption of the schedule and long-term disease. We know that shift workers have higher rates of metabolic disease. We know that disrupted sleep is associated with lower growth hormone output. We know that artificial light at night suppresses melatonin. We do not yet have the clean prospective evidence that fixing the schedule fixes the disease, partly because the experiment is hard to run on humans for 30 years. The mechanism is plausible. The dose is being worked out. So when I tell you that your hormones are on a schedule, that is bedrock. When I tell you that disrupting that schedule disrupts cortisol and melatonin and growth hormone, that is bedrock. When I tell you that this disruption causes specific diseases at a specific magnitude in a specific time frame, that is where you should keep your skepticism on. And now I want to point out something that I find very strange. A pharmaceutical company can sell you a synthetic melatonin tablet for about $10 or $15 a bottle, sometimes much more, depending on formulation. Synthetic cortisol, hydrocortisone, is prescribed for people whose adrenal glands have failed. Recombinant human growth hormone for adults costs tens of thousands of dollars a year and requires nightly injections. Testosterone replacement therapy is a multi-billion-dollar industry in this country alone. Every one of these is the same molecule your body is already making on a schedule for free. Now, I am not telling you not to use these drugs. There are real medical conditions, adrenal insufficiency, pituitary tumors, severe deficiency states, where exogenous hormones are appropriate and sometimes life-saving. I am telling you something else. The same molecular pathway that the drug activates is being activated in pulses on a precise daily schedule by your own glands when the schedule is honored. The pulse from your own pituitary is smaller than the pharmaceutical dose. It is also rhythmic, which the pharmaceutical dose usually is not. A constant level of any of these hormones, flat with no rhythm, is not what your body evolved to receive. Your receptors expect the pulses. They downregulate when the pulses stop. I want to be careful here. I am not telling you that a regular sleep schedule and morning light substitute for medication when medication is required. I am telling you that the natural rhythms produce a baseline that the medications cannot fully replicate, even at higher doses, because the medications usually deliver a flat exposure where the body wants a pulse. Charles Czeisler and others have been arguing for years that the schedule is the prescription. The molecules in the pharmacy are doing the same chemistry, just less precisely, less rhythmically, and at a markup of several hundred to several thousand times. The schedule is free. The schedule is in you already. The only thing required to access it is the light, the dark, the meals, and the sleep at the right times. There is an old piece of advice that doctors used to give 100 years ago. Doctors before electric light. Doctors who watched their patients live by the sun and saw what happened when they did not. Early to bed. Early to rise. That is not just moral instruction from Benjamin Franklin. Those 6 words encode the entire schedule I have just described. Early to bed means melatonin rising in darkness when your pineal is ready to release it. Slow wave sleep in the first part of the night, when growth hormone fires its largest pulse. Cortisol falling to its midnight trough on time. Early to rise means light at the retina before the cortisol awakening response has finished. The clock and train for another 24 hours. The whole schedule set, on time, free of charge. The grandmother who told you to go to bed before midnight was not being old-fashioned. She was telling you to honor a schedule written into the rice grain of neurons at the base of your brain. Tonight, when you turn out the light, pay attention to one thing. Notice whether the room is dark enough that you cannot see your hand in front of your face. If you can see your hand, the photons are still hitting your retina, and the pineal is still waiting for permission. Make the room dark. Let the schedule begin. Before you go, tell me one thing. What is the time of day when you feel most like yourself?